Hello there, and welcome to Murder Most British. I'm Zach.
Hey, welcome. I'm Rachel. Thanks for joining us.
Yes, thank you for joining us for another episode.
Yeah, episode 37 we're on.
Yeah. Going to your favourite place, Wales.
Ugh.
Yeah.
Okay. Not that I don't take that I don't like Wales. I mean, I've never been, but their place names and stuff, it's really tricky to say.
Yeah.
Especially when you don't say it like often. So
yeah. Well, it's not too bad. It's not too bad this time. So don't worry about it. So we're going off to Wales. This one's a crazy one. I couldn't believe it. And then I'm looking for things to documentaries or something because it's so crazy.
Yeah.
Ain't nothing
Oh,
out
really?
there. Yeah. I couldn't find very many of anything.
Zach does all the research and stuff. So, and then, I read through the stories, but I don't really sort of like delve into it until I hear it as I'm telling it to you guys. So, I learn stuff as I go. So, makes it more exciting for me, to be fair, because I feel like I'm like you guys just hearing it for the first time or.
I did in the beginning think that maybe we would do like how some other ones do it to where someone just tells the story and then the other person reacts to it. But I was like, nah, I want us both to share in the same sort of storytelling.
Yeah, definitely.
It'd be more fun.
Yeah. Well, before we begin, a small request from us.
If you'd like to support the show directly and unlock ad-free episodes, bonus episodes, early access, Q&As, and more, you can now join our Patreon community. Jump over to patreon.com/Murder Most British Podcast. We'd love to have you there.
Definitely. If you enjoy listening to our true crime stories, please give us a like, follow, and a 5-star rating. Would really help because it helps the other people get to see
what we do,
what we're doing. Also, you can follow us on TikTok, Instagram at Murder Most British, and on Facebook at MMB Podcast. Your support really helps the archive grow and ensures that no story is ever forgotten.
You can also join us on the public Crypt Chat, our free Discord channel, where you can talk about cases, share theories, and read the latest news from the archive.
This episode contains discussion of extreme violence, including a brutal killing and graphic descriptions from the crime scene. It also includes references to cannibalism, drug use, and themes of mental illness. Some listeners may find this material distressing, so listener discretion is strongly advised.
Now, let's get to the story.
Just after midnight at a small hotel in a Welsh village, a woman went to check on a disturbance in one of the rooms. Inside, she found a young woman laying on the floor, covered in blood. Standing over her was a man, his clothes stained, his focus fixed on what he was doing. She backed out in horror. Shaking, she dialed 999, tried to explain what she had just seen. But before the operator could fully understand what she was describing, the caller uttered a sentence that would soon dominate headlines across Britain. He's actually eating her.
In early November of 2014, Argoed was the sort of place where very little seemed to change. Tucked into the South Wales valleys, it carried the quiet rhythm of a former mining village, rows of houses, narrow roads, and the sense that most people already knew the lives unfolding around them. Days passed without urgency, nights settled quickly. But on one stretch of the village stood a building that didn't quite belong into the stillness anymore, a place where lives in motion briefly came to rest.
The Sirhowy Arms, is that how?
Sirhowy? Yeah, it's. I was like, at first I was like, who's Sirhowy? Is he some knight or something from back in the day? But I was like, no, that's just a name.
That's the name. Well, the Sirhowy Arms had once been a pub and guest house, the kind of place people passed through without thinking twice. By 2014, it served a different purpose. It had become a temporary accommodation, a stopgap for people with nowhere else to go. Some arrived straight from prison, some from the streets. Others carried quieter forms of instability. It was not somewhere people chose, it was somewhere they ended up. A place defined less by comfort and more by necessity.
Among those moving through the building that autumn was Matthew Williams. He was 34 years old when he arrived, released from Park Prison on the 23rd of October after serving a 27-month sentence for blackmail. His life had followed a familiar pattern: offending, custody, release, and then back again. By then, it was no longer a cycle that disrupted his life. It was the structure of it. Instability wasn't something that came and went. It was constant. Attempts had been made to house him in Newport through his father, but the application failed over residency requirements. Instead, he was placed at the Sirhowy Arms through Caerphilly Council, a temporary solution arranged quickly and with little room for much else.
There had been warning signs long before that final release. His mother would later describe a man who had struggled not just with crime and addiction, but with his own mind. She spoke of paranoia, of voices, of beliefs that didn't align with reality, what she understood to be schizophrenia, though later medical opinion would question whether those symptoms were driven by drug use rather than a fixed condition. Her account described a life that never quite settled. Periods of calm would come and go, but they never lasted. And each time, the same pattern followed: a return to environments that offered neither treatment nor structure.
Yeah, it seems like it was just kind of a revolving door of, he just offending, and then he's unstable. He couldn't get the help that he needed, or just didn't want it.
Yeah.
And then right back in, and then out, and then back in. It's just awful.
Which you do see with a lot of prisoners. A lot of them aren't able to be sort of rehabilitated. They come out and, depending on how, I do know there's not a lot of support for them when they come out, to be fair. Not a lot of structured, right, this is what you do. They come out, they have to go to probation like once a week or, but that's it. That's pretty much all they get.
And then any support it's whether they want it.
It's whether
not.
That or they seek it out themselves.
Yeah. And then it's like with the Sirhowy Arms, that's not like a care facility. That's not a psychiatric
that's just
facility.
Kind of like a halfway house, really. But obviously,
it's not a place that's equipped for stuff like that. And it feels like there's an overflow of stuff that can't be dealt with.
Yeah.
And they just stick him in this place and go, here you go, man. Awful. Well, drugs had been part of that pattern for years. Those who knew him described long-term use, including amphetamines, also known as speed. These are substances that deepened his paranoia, altered his behavior in ways that made him harder to read and harder to predict. By the time he arrived at the Sirhowy Arms, there were already signs of change. Friends and family would later describe him becoming unsettled again, seeing things, hearing things, growing increasingly detached. It wasn't a sudden break. It was gradual, a shift that had already begun and was now quietly gathering pace.
And yet, inside the hostel, none of that was immediately visible. The manager would later describe him as polite, calm, easy to deal with. She had not been told about his history and had no reason to see him as anything other than another arrival. In a place like that, people came and went constantly. Bags brought in, keys handed over, doors closed. Whatever someone carried with them, their past, their problems, often stayed out of sight, at least at first.
That was part of the difficulty. Buildings like the Sirhowy Arms were expected to absorb a complexity they were never designed to manage. Addiction, criminal histories, fractured relationships, untreated mental health, all contained within a structure built for something far simpler. Staff could oversee the practical side, the rooms, the routines, the movements of people in and out. But what they couldn't control were the things that arrived unseen, the histories that followed people through the door, and the risks that didn't announce themselves.
Well, in the weeks leading up to his release, those risks had already been noted. A probation assessment completed on the 10th of October classified Williams as a medium risk of serious harm to the public. A safety plan was discussed. Police were made aware and support services were outlined. But there was a limit to what could be done. Having served his full sentence, there was no licence conditions, no requirement to engage. Support could be offered but not enforced, and in the days after his release, he chose not to take it.
Also moving through that part of South Wales at the time was 22-year-old Cerys Yemm. She lived nearby in Blackwood, a mother of two, working, building a life, and still at the beginning of it. To those who knew her, she was simply getting on with things, work, friends, nights out. There was nothing about her life that suggested it would intersect with somewhere like the Sirhowy Arms. Nothing to suggest that her path and his would cross at all.
But they did. The two had met only weeks earlier, likely on a night out in Blackwood toward the end of October. On the evening of the 5th of November, they were together again. This time at the home of Williams's friend, Rodri Moore, in Argoed. There was nothing unusual about it, drinks, conversation, the slow drift of an ordinary night. To anyone there, it would have seemed unremarkable, just another evening continuing on.
Then, sometime between 11:30 p.m. and midnight, Williams and Cerys left Moore's house and made their way back toward the Sirhowy Arms. Friends would later say he had promised to get her a taxi home. Inside, the building had already settled. Doors closed, corridors quiet. The low, familiar stillness that follows midnight had taken hold. Nothing about the place suggested anything had changed. Nothing suggested what was about to happen.
Not long after midnight, something began to shift inside the Sirhowy Arms. At first, it was just noise, the kind that could be dismissed, half heard through walls and corridors, easy to ignore if you weren't listening for it. But it didn't fade. It grew louder, sharper, more defined. People nearby began to realise that what they were hearing was not an argument, not raised voices carried too far through thin walls, but something else entirely. Something urgent, something wrong. From inside one room, a woman was screaming. The sound cut through the stillness of the early hours, carrying along the corridor, drawing attention towards the door that remained firmly closed.
The cries were loud enough to alarm the other residents, and word quickly reached Mandy Miles, who was managing the hostel that night. She made her way upstairs, following the noise as it echoed through the building, until she reached the door to Williams's room. She knocked, waited. There was no answer. Inside, the screaming continued. With no response and no sign that anything was improving, she used the room's door code to unlock it and slowly pushed the door open.
What she saw inside was something she would never forget. Later, when she tried to describe it, she reached for the simplest comparison she could find. Quote, "It was like a horror film." The room itself was small, enclosed, but what filled it made it feel overwhelming. Blood covered the floor, spreading across the space. And at its centre lay Cerys Yemm. Motionless, her body still. Standing over her was Matthew Williams. His clothes were stained, his head lowered towards her. He did not react to the door opening. Even as she spoke, he did not look up.
In that moment, Miles said she could immediately tell there were no signs of life. The amount of blood pooling on the floor made that clear. Still, she tried to speak to him, to break through whatever state he was in. Miles asked, "Do you know what you're doing to that girl?" The reply didn't bring clarity. It only made the moment feel more unreal. Williams replied, "That's no girl." Miles would later say he did not appear to recognize her at all, as if she were not even there, as if nothing beyond that moment had any meaning to him.
There was no attempt to confront him further, realising the situation was beyond anything she could intervene in. She stepped back from the room and pulled the door closed behind her. Instead, she reached for a phone and dialed 999, trying to find the words to describe something that didn't feel real. Something that didn't fit into anything she had experienced before. The call that followed would later become one of the most chilling pieces of evidence connected to the case. "There's a lad in the room," she told the operator. "He's actually eating her. It's awful." At another point, her voice broke under the shock of what she had seen. There was screaming and screaming. "Oh my God, it's awful."
Even as she spoke to the operator, Miles took another step, one that would later stand out in the accounts of that night. She stayed at the door. One hand gripped the handle, holding it firmly shut, making sure the man inside could not come out into the corridor before police arrived. Later, she explained the decision in simple terms. "I made damn sure he couldn't get out," she said. "I was in total fear of what he was capable of." Behind the door, the room had fallen quiet.
That's crazy.
That is wild. Just something, you
Imagine
think
walking into something like that and just you're in such shock because your eyes, you're not believing what your eyes are seeing, but then it's like, I don't know how I could handle that.
Yeah, I would think for me, I'd be like, oh, they're having an argument or whatever, and she's, maybe he's beating her up or something.
Mm.
That's why she's screaming for help. And you come into something like that, what would you know what to do?
There's no way that you would anticipate that was what was happening inside the room.
Yeah.
Well, police received the call at 1:23 a.m. Within minutes, officers were on their way, responding to what had already been reported as a violent attack. By around 1:37 a.m., they arrived at the Sirhowy Arms. Outside, the stillness of the village was broken by the arrival of patrol cars. Blue lights reflected off nearby buildings, cutting across windows and walls as officers stepped out and moved quickly inside. Mandy Miles was waiting for them.
When officers entered the room, they were stepping into a scene that had already crossed beyond rescue. They issued commands, clear, direct, ordering Williams to move away and get onto the ground. He did not respond in any clear or compliant way. Instead, he resisted. He struggled as officers attempted to restrain him, forcing him into a physical confrontation inside the confined space of the room. One officer would later describe the moment, recalling that Williams had an angry look and that he looked into his eyes and they appeared almost black.
Looked very vacant then, just not there.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, faced with a situation that was rapidly escalating, officers made the decision to use a taser in an attempt to bring him under control. But even then, Williams continued to resist. The struggle continued on the floor, officers working together to restrain him, handcuffs, leg restraints, each step taken to bring the situation under control. Eventually, after repeated attempts, they were able to secure him. Only then could their attention fully return to the young woman lying motionless nearby.
Inside the room, there was nothing anyone could do to change what had already happened. Cerys was beyond help. As officers worked to contain the scene, another development began to unfold, one that would shift the focus of the night once again. Williams's condition, which had seemed stable moments earlier, began to change as paramedics carried out their assessment.
At first, there was no immediate sign that his condition was critical. His breathing and pulse appeared normal as they began their checks. But within minutes, something began to go wrong. His breathing slowed, became irregular, and then weaker. As he was moved from the room and taken downstairs towards an ambulance, the situation deteriorated further, the change becoming impossible to ignore.
Then, he stopped breathing. Paramedics began attempting to revive him in the back of the ambulance parked outside the hostel. Efforts continued, but nothing changed the outcome. A short time later, at 2:18 a.m., he was pronounced dead. Less than an hour earlier, people inside the building had heard a woman screaming. Now, in that same span of time, 2 people were dead. Oh, fucking wild. You would just think, oh, they've got him. If they got him restrained. Everything's good.
Yeah.
They've got the perpetrator. Try to, help with Cerys, or whatever.
Mm.
And then just all of a sudden, he goes into some sort of state. And
and your initial thing, you'd think, oh, maybe he's having a panic attack. He's having a panic because he's been, caught in doing this, etc. But obviously took a real turn quite sharply.
Yeah.
And then, passing away. I mean, the police officers and the paramedics probably thinking, what the hell has happened? Why is this person passed away? Because he was clearly
and then also
okay.
Thinking of the officers, they're like, is this something that we did? They're like, what went wrong?
Yeah.
What's happened here?
Maybe too much pressure, like when they're trying to restrain him.
Yeah.
God, who knows?
Wild.
We may find out. We may find out.
Yep.
Well, news of what had happened spread quickly beyond Argoed. Within hours, the story was appearing in newspapers across Britain. That phrase, taken from the emergency call, began to dominate the coverage. But behind the headlines, behind the speculation and the attention, one unsettling reality remained. The man responsible was already dead. And with him went the only account of what had unfolded inside that room in those final moments.
In the hours after the deaths at the Sirhowy Arms, the building was transformed. What had been a temporary shelter became a sealed crime scene. Officers from Gwent Police secured the property, while specialist investigators moved in, focusing their attention on the small upstairs room where everything had taken place. Scenes of crime officers worked methodically. Photographs were taken, evidence was logged, the layout of the room was documented in precise detail. What had happened there would now be reconstructed piece by piece.
Inside the room, investigators began the process of working backwards through the final minutes of Cerys Yemm's life. Blood patterns were examined, the position of her body was recorded. Objects within the room were noted exactly as they had been found. From these details, a sequence began to emerge. The injuries pointed towards the use of a sharp instrument. Evidence later suggested a screwdriver had been used during the attack, indicating not only a single act of violence, but something sustained, chaotic, and prolonged. Investigators also recovered fragments of a broken bowl, suggesting more than one object may have been used during the attack.
Post-mortem examinations revealed the full scale of the injuries. Pathologist Dr. Richard Jones found that Cerys had suffered 89 separate injuries, many of them sharp force wounds concentrated around her face and neck. Good Lord, that is insane. The severity of those injuries led medical experts to conclude that she would have lost consciousness rapidly. The final determination was clear. She had died as a result of sharp force trauma.
That's probably only one good thing about this whole situation is that she would have lost consciousness and not known what the hell was going on and what he was doing to her. I think, God, terrifying.
Crazy.
A separate examination was carried out to determine why Matthew Williams had died. At first, there was no immediate answer. Early reports listed the cause as unascertained while further testing was carried out. But as those results began to return, a clearer picture started to form. Medical evidence would later show that he had suffered cardiac arrest following restraint by police officers at the scene. What remained unclear, at least initially, was why that collapse had occurred, and whether it could be attributed to a single cause or to several factors acting together.
I like the way you say attributed.
Well, attributed. I say it in the English way, dude.
Sorry. English. And you're very posh.
Not American English.
And you're very posh when you say occurred.
Occurred.
Speaking the King's English.
Occurred.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, one of the most significant findings came from the toxicology. Tests showed that Williams had amphetamines in his system at levels consistent with significant recent use. Witnesses described him as having taken drugs heavily in the days leading up to the attack. One toxicologist later stated that he appeared to have been using amphetamines virtually on a daily basis in the 2 weeks before his death. His behavior that night, investigators were told, was consistent with a condition known as excited delirium, a state often associated with heavy stimulant use.
Damn.
Yeah. Hey, kids, don't do drugs.
Yeah, our advice, don't do drugs.
Good God.
Jesus. Medical specialists explained that stimulant drugs such as amphetamines can place extreme strain on the body. Heart rate increases, blood pressure rises, agitation intensifies. In situations involving physical struggle, that strain can become critical. Investigators began to consider whether it was this combination of drug use, stress, and restraint that had led to the cardiac arrest. The conclusion that emerged was not simple. There was no single cause. Instead, it appeared to be a combination of factors, each contributing to the outcome.
Well, I mean, goodness, he was only 34 and he's over there having a heart attack because of all this drug use and shit. That's crazy.
Yeah, see, that's the thing. It's not really, 34, is not known many, I can't word it.
There's not many people that are at 34 years old have their heart explode.
Yeah,
and a heart attack.
It's not a regular occurrence.
Yeah. I mean, unless you have health issues and whatnot. His health issue was too many drugs.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Which obviously affected his heart, which, don't do drugs.
Yeah. Goodness. Well, at the same time, detectives continued to build the timeline, not just of that night, but of the days leading up to it. On the 3rd of November, just 3 days before the attack, police had executed a drugs warrant at Williams's room at the hostel. Nothing of evidential value was found. He wasn't present. But the search itself revealed something important. He was already on their radar.
There had been earlier warnings too. While in prison, Williams had sent a series of threatening letters directed at his former partner, her family, and police officers. These letters had been handed to authorities months before his release. Officers considered whether charges could be brought. None were. Later, those letters would be re-examined in a different light. Not as isolated threats, but as potential indicators of risk. A warning, perhaps.
Well, hindsight is 20/20.
Yeah, that is very true.
They didn't go to intervention of any kind.
Yep.
Well, no shit.
It didn't lead to any intervention, no.
Crazy. And it's he's just medium risk, but he's sending out these letters and threatening a bunch of multiple people, not just one person.
That's a high risk if you're threatening. It's not like he's just verbally doing it as well. It's written. Yeah. There's actual evidence that he has said this. Crazy. Absolute crazy.
Well, investigators then returned to the events inside the hostel itself. They spoke to residents who had heard the screaming. They gathered statements from staff who had been present that night. Mandy Miles described opening the door and seeing what she later called, quote, a bloodbath, before retreating and calling emergency services. Each account added another fragment to the puzzle.
Mm-hmm. Well, the officers who had entered the room also give detailed accounts. One described the moment simply, quote, I've never been so scared in my life. They spoke of Williams not responding to commands, of his continued resistance as they attempted to restrain him. Concerned about the threat he posed, an officer deployed a taser. It was discharged 4 times over approximately 7 minutes before Williams was finally brought under control using handcuffs and leg restraints.
Holy shit.
I mean, he took 4.
4 shots. I mean,
that in itself, 4 shots from the taser, because obviously the taser could affect your heart rate. Maybe it can actually trigger your heart rhythm to change pattern and whatever.
Yeah.
So where they say there's multiple
factors going into all this.
Yeah, I think,
Good God.
had he not needed to be tasered so many times and,
Possibly.
physically restrained because he just was not complying, maybe he wouldn't have died, but...
I think it was all the stress, the physical exertion, the taser.
Exactly. I mean, he would have been
everything.
running off adrenaline. His adrenaline would have been high as well during this horrible attack. So,
well, this is addressed because his death followed direct contact with police. The case was automatically referred to the Independent Police Complaints Commission. The IPCC began its own investigation examining the actions of the officers, the use of the taser, and the methods of restraint used during the arrest. Their role was not to revisit the killing of Cerys Yemm. It was to determine whether police had acted appropriately in the circumstances they faced. It was a separate process, running alongside the murder inquiry, adding another layer of scrutiny to the case already under intense attention.
Well, you would expect the IPCC to do an investigation because obviously, anybody that has been arrested and is in police custody that has died needs to be investigated.
Oh,
so,
yeah. It's to, I mean, even though it was a criminal or whatever, they did something wrong, they do have rights. They do, to not be killed in custody. So it's, if anything could be learned, if anything could be, some training or something that could help.
Better ways to try to restrain people.
Yes, or anything that could help prevent it in the future that should be learned and taken on board.
Because ideally, we would have wanted him to be alive so that he could, Cerys's family and herself could have justice.
Mm-hmm.
If him, being stuck behind bars. But unfortunately, that was not the case. But even as the evidence clarified what had happened inside that room, broader questions began to surface beyond it. Williams had been released from prison only weeks earlier. Police had raised concerns before his release, but their ability to act had been limited. How someone with his history had come to be placed in a hostel alongside vulnerable residents quickly became a central issue. The focus began to shift away from the room itself and towards the decision that had led him to being there at all. Questions of release, support and oversight, and of what, if anything, might have been missed before that night ever began.
So nearly 2.5 years after the deaths at the Sirhowy Arms, the case returned, not as a crime scene investigation, but as a courtroom process. The inquest was not there to relive the night step by step. It was there to examine the evidence already gathered and determine what could formally be established. Assumptions were tested, early conclusions were questioned, and piece by piece, the case was narrowed to what could be proven and what could not.
Witnesses returned to give evidence again, this time under examination. Details were revisited, accounts were challenged. What emerged was a clearer understanding of how much of the early narrative had been shaped in shock and how easily those first impressions had carried into public reporting without being fully tested. One of the most significant outcomes of the inquest was not what it added, but what it removed.
Yeah, we're going back into the old tabloid rags.
Yep.
Just like old Maudsley.
Yeah.
Yeah, the false
they
narrative.
They want to deal with facts, don't they? And they don't want tabloids and newspapers and that to keep putting out like stuff that's actually just untrue or exaggerated or,
Well, like I said with Maudsley, the lie can travel around the world before the truth is putting its shoes on.
Yeah.
That's just how it goes.
And then the lies will just never fade. They will override any truth because it's already been out there and circulated far and wide that people won't believe the truth. Then
they just want to sell. They just want to sell papers. If you have a headline that reads "Cannibal Killer Eats Woman," you're gonna be like, "Holy shit, man! I need to buy this paper. I need to read this story." That's all it is. It's not the fucking truth.
Mind you, newspapers, I don't think many people are like buying newspapers anymore. You got all your news stuff online. So, you know.
And it's the same with them ones. You need clickbait titles to get people to go onto that website to see the ads, so the ads can pay the guys for it. They make money.
Yeah.
It's simple as that. Bastards. Well, claims that had dominated headlines in the immediate aftermath were tested against medical evidence and, in some cases, set aside. The hearing drew a distinction between what had been reported and what could actually be supported. At the center of that reassessment was the claim that had come to define the case publicly, the suggestion of cannibalism. The inquest addressed it directly. Medical experts confirmed that while bite marks were present, there was no evidence that any part of Cerys Yemm had been eaten. Cannibalism had not occurred at all.
Good. I mean, that's just gross. Like, honestly, I don't understand how people can do that.
Oh, well, I'll find some more cases that have
freaky.
Well, we did it with Menzies when he was drinking blood.
That freaks me out. I was like, oh my God.
Yeah. That's a previous episode.
It's just horrible.
Yeah.
Jesus.
Thought he was a vampire.
Oh, seriously. Well, what had become the most recognizable detail of the case was rooted not in fact, but in perception, in what had been seen or believed to have been seen in a moment of extreme shock. The inquest also examined the death of Matthew Williams, where early reports had left open multiple possibilities. The evidence pointed instead to a combination of factors: the amphetamine use, physical struggle and stress placed on his body. Together, they contributed to the cardiac arrest.
Yeah, usually like eyewitnesses, they're not exactly always reliable, especially under extreme stress like that.
Yeah.
You just see something and you're like, whoa, and your mind kind of
it's trying
runs
to
wild.
Picture and place things and say, right, this is what you're seeing. Your brain is doing that.
Yeah.
You know, your eyes are seeing it, but your brain is trying to tell you what you're seeing.
Yeah, it's trying to process what the fuck is going on.
Brain's a powerful thing, isn't it, really?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it can close things off to trauma, to help protect itself.
Yeah.
The brain is quite wild. Well, the actions of the officers were examined in that same light. They had entered an active and dangerous scene, and the question was whether their response had been justified in that moment. The conclusion was that it had.
Yeah, 100%. I agree.
Yeah, if someone who could take 4 taser shots.
What else can you do? You know, you've tried.
As people that are on, high on drugs, like was it PCP and stuff, and they just have this strength, that that adrenaline and that all that shit's pumping, and they can just fight off fucking 4, 5, 6 officers.
Yeah,
and you're just like, what the fuck?
No, I definitely think that I agree that it's justified.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the force used, including the repeated use of a taser, was found to be reasonable given the circumstances, and the IPCC later reached the same finding. The inquest also turned to what had happened before the attack. Evidence showed that support had been available following Williams's release, but that it had depended on his willingness to accept it.
They should really bring in that, like something like a post-release, you have to, I don't know, do 6 months of like some type of therapy, especially if you're showing signs of like issues with drug use or, like prior to you being put in jail.
But also you have a problem though. Look at the Sirhowy Arms. You have a place that's being used to house these people that actually need better care and a better place and people there to be able to support them.
See, it's the thing, it's like nowadays we don't really have that, like back obviously many decades ago, you had the asylum places.
Yeah.
Obviously we do have mental health facilities, but people with certain like with drug use, like dependency and stuff like that, they don't get housed in these places for treatments, and I think it's last resort, or if you are literally, highly schizophrenic and you've done something terrible, that they'll put you in and house you in these places. But for preventable kind of things to help support these people.
Yeah, so
there should be like, instead of a halfway hostel house, they should be released to, a mental health therapy place.
Yeah, maybe not like a high security.
No, not high security.
Place like
just a place that they could go to.
Yeah. Well, all that costs money.
I know. In an ideal world.
Yeah.
But yeah, what emerged was not a single failure, but something less defined. A gap between what existed in theory and what could be enforced in practice. When the jury returned its conclusions, that separation was reflected clearly. Cerys Yemm's death was recorded as unlawful killing. Matthew Williams's death was given a narrative conclusion. The findings did not reopen the case, but they did define its limits. What could be said with certainty and what could not? What the inquest ultimately provided was not a new version of events, but a narrower one.
It removed the speculation, corrected some of the most widely repeated claims, and fixed the case within the boundaries of evidence. But within these boundaries, one question remained: whether what had happened that night had been inevitable, or whether, somewhere along the way, there had been a moment where things might have gone differently.
In the days that followed the deaths at the Sirhowy Arms, the village of Argoed found itself pulled into national attention. News of what had happened and the death of 22-year-old Cerys Yemm spread quickly across the United Kingdom. With it came repetition, headlines, broadcasts, online reports, many returning again and again to the same phrase taken from the emergency call. What had happened inside a single hostel room was no longer contained. It had become a national story.
So for those living in Argoed, the impact was immediate. The Sirhowy Arms was not an abstract place. It was familiar, part of the village itself. The idea that such violence had taken place there was difficult to process. Attention quickly turned to the building and to the role it played within the community. Questions followed. Whether a place like that had ever been suited to housing people with complex, unstable needs in the middle of a small residential area.
In the weeks that followed, those concerns grew louder. Some residents called for the hostel to be closed altogether. Others argued it had never been equipped to manage people dealing with addiction, mental health difficulties, and recent criminal histories. There were also concerns about transparency, that the nature of placements had not been fully explained. What had once been a background unease was now being spoken openly, sharpened by fear, grief, and the sense that something had not been fully understood before it was too late.
Yeah, because you have people who are just running a hostel. Yeah. They're not medical professionals.
No.
They're not any sort of authority, and they don't know how to handle people like this.
And it's going to be violent people, all sorts of different...
But also, they're not being told, okay, this guy's got these problems, this person's got these problems.
This person, because this is their history of,
because they can't tell them
what their crime was.
Yeah, they can't tell them medical stuff and all the,
It's all that data protection stuff as well now. But,
so they're going in blind.
They should have the heads up, basically, to know who they have in this building, really, in my view.
Mm-hmm. At the same time, scrutiny turned toward the decisions that had placed Matthew Williams in the Sirhowy Arms so soon after his release from prison. A probation assessment had classified him as medium risk of serious harm. Support options had been discussed, a safety plan had been outlined, but in practice, there was no way to ensure he engaged with any of it. Support could be offered, concerns could be recorded, but ultimately, the choice remained his.
Yeah. I think because obviously he didn't have any license conditions.
There was no way to force him to do anything.
Exactly.
He was a free man.
Which I think there should all, do some sort of conditions for post-release. They have to have some sort of structured, you need to do this.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? For the next sort of 4 months, say, just to get them back into civilian life.
Yeah, help transition them into, back to life again.
His mother later spoke publicly, describing a man who had struggled for years with mental health problems and addiction, and who, in her view, had been released without the support that he needed. Quote, "He should have been in hospital," she said. "He needed help." Her words reflected a wider concern about people leaving prison with unresolved issues, minimal structure, and no system capable of ensuring that help, even when available, was actually taken.
As formal reviews began, the picture that emerged was complex and uncomfortable. A serious further offence review was launched, while Healthcare Inspectorate Wales examined the role of health services. Their findings did not point to a single failure. Instead, they concluded that, based on the information available at the time, what happened would have been difficult to predict or prevent. Typical government line.
Yeah, I don't know about predicting. I mean, he
You had some fucking red flags.
He wasn't low risk. He was medium risk. You know,
but in truth, he was a fucking high risk.
Yeah. But, you know, you look at the threatening letters he'd sent to multiple people and even including police officers, you know.
And then the prior history of
there
just the revolving...
There should have been some supervision of some sort once he left prison.
Yeah, it was just a revolving door of in and out of prison and trouble and you know, and then threatening letters and it's like, come on, man.
Well, not everyone accepted that conclusion.
Yep.
Professor Robert Snowden, a forensic psychologist at Cardiff University, argued that Williams should never have been assessed as medium risk, but as a very high one. He pointed to the same factors repeatedly: a history of violence, a willingness to use weapons, long-term drug misuse, and a pattern of refusing treatment and support. Taken together, those factors painted a picture that, in his view, had been underestimated.
I agree, Professor.
I agree with the professor.
Well, in that interpretation, the risk was not hidden. Once released, it was likely he would deteriorate quickly, return to drugs, and become unstable again within days. From that came a further criticism that too much attention had been placed on diagnosis, on what condition best described him, and not enough on the more immediate questions of what risk he posed when drugs, instability, and violence were all present at once.
The case also brought renewed focus to how those earlier warnings had been interpreted. Months before his release, Williams had sent the series of threatening letters from prison, directed at the former partners, their families, and police officers. They were known to authorities. At the time, they were not treated as evidence of escalating risk. No charges followed, no further action was taken. But later expert opinion challenged that approach. Those letters, it was argued, were not isolated or impulsive. They reflected fixation, hostility, and a willingness to direct violence towards specific people. In that context, they were not just behaviour to be recorded, but behaviour to be interpreted. A signal, perhaps, that the level of risk had been misunderstood.
Yep. Like I said before, hindsight's 20/20, but you got to take things seriously.
Yeah.
Well, the media coverage added another layer. Many reports referred to Williams as a cannibal killer. The phrase spread quickly, shaping public understanding before the evidence had been fully examined. Williams's father later challenged the description as misleading, but by then it had already taken hold. And like many narratives formed in the aftermath of violence, it proved difficult to undo. The correction that cannibalism had not occurred never carried the same weight as the original claim. The case became an example of how quickly perception can turn into belief, and how, once established, it is rarely fully reversed.
But beneath all of that, the headlines, the labels, and the debate, the reality remained unchanged. A young woman had lost her life in an act of extreme violence. What remained were fragments, witness accounts, medical findings, review conclusions, and questions, some answered, some not. For the people of Argoed, the memory of that night remained tied to a place they had always known, But for those who knew Cerys Yemm, it was never a case or headline or a story to be debated. It was the sudden loss of someone they loved, a life that should have continued far beyond that night.
Yep. Well, that was the story of the Sirhowy Arms murder of Cerys Yemm.
Horrific.
Absolutely crazy.
You can understand with hostel manager or lady that was working that night, entering the room, seeing him, you would think, oh my God, he's eaten her, which, and then having that stick in the headlines,
Yep.
And just
Yep.
not able to, even when the evidence come out that he hadn't actually consumed any body parts or anything like that, they still wouldn't move away from the original.
Oh, it was all corrected and everything.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
But once it's out, it's like the genie's out of the bottle.
Yeah.
You can't put it back in.
Yeah.
And you can say, whatever, years later or whatever, say, oh, sorry, we got this one wrong. The story's long gone.
Yeah.
That train's left the station.
But it's actually, it's so tragic. And, his motives, it just seems to be, maybe he was hallucinating from the drugs or, I'm just assuming, this is just my assumptions, but.
That's what it was. They said it was more than likely that delirium, excited delirium, that comes from heavy amphetamine use.
Yes, I'd never heard of that before. Crazy. Well, that's a sad case.
Yep, very sad. And just thinking of Cerys, and her family and the people affected, especially like the people that were there and the manager, Mandy, that had to see it.
Yeah.
And the police officers that they had to go through all that. Things like this just affect so many more people than what people think.
It does. It's just horrendous. It was such a young girl, just 22. It's just.
Had her whole life ahead of her. Crazy.
I definitely think, more needs to be done for people with mental health issues, and especially prisoners that come out. There should be, a mandatory post-release, some sort of, supervision or.
Just support.
Yeah.
Well, anyways, so if you would like to support the work we do here in the archive, please take a moment to follow the show and leave us a 5-star rating. It helps others discover the stories that we tell and keeps the archive growing. Sharing the podcast with someone who loves true crime also makes a huge difference.
Yep, most definitely. And you can also jump over to our Patreon for more true crime episodes, ad-free and 24 hours early access. Just go to patreon.com/MurderMostBritish podcast, and you can follow us on Instagram at TikTok at MurderMostBritish and on Facebook at MMB Podcast. And if you'd like to chat with us and other listeners, come and join us at the Public Crypt. It's our free Discord space with case discussions, theories, and updates from the archive.
Everything you need, socials, Discord, Patreon, it's all in the link tree below.
So until next week, guys, stay safe and stay curious.
Bye-bye.